webinars to you on critical business issues as part of a public good. And it's really not only about the governance of an organization, but also leadership. Now, one of the things that we speak about often is about the competency of leaders and the competency of the board of directors. And that's what we're going to be speaking about today is board competency, but not only just how competent and what does competent mean, but also looking at how can we make sure that our boards and our leadership are competent for future risks and future opportunities so that we are future ready leaders in the organization. Now, if you haven't been with a webinar with us before, the chat function is open. Please let us know where you're from, like all of our regulars are letting us know where they're from. The Q&A function is also open. We please ask you if you have any questions for Jay, and we will have a good 20 minutes at the end to ask Jay questions. But if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A function so that we can better find them. It's difficult to find them in the chat function. We also have the reactions. As you saw earlier, somebody was using the reactions. If you like what Jay's saying, please give us some feedback. Thank you for the heart. Really appreciate it. Really looking forward to speaking with you today and understanding this very interesting and very engaging topic. I won't say anything more other than to introduce Jay Weiser. And everybody, Jay comes to us from the United States. So we are in a later time zone that we normally host these events, but I really do hope that you enjoy what Jay has to say to us today. So Jay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I got to make it over to your time zone. That's my goal.
Good. And our wine farm's down in Cape Town.
Okay, let me just share my screen. You seeing my screen now just to check?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. All right. So the big question we're facing today is, are you ready for what's next? So let's begin with the truth. Disruption and uncertainty are normal. This disruption and uncertainty is ongoing. We know it's unrelenting, and it's more interconnected than ever. But we need to think about this as a feature of the world we're in. It's not a bug that we can eliminate. Now, today, we're not just here to talk about governance. We're here to reimagine its potential. Is your board built to lead in this environment, or is it even built to survive? If you're like most audiences I work with, very few of you would confidently say, yes, we are ready. So let's start with a preview of what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be moving from insight to action. We're going to challenge traditional thinking along the way. Focus on listening. Take some notes. You will have access to the slides afterwards. And as we go through today's presentation, note how you feel. Are you concerned? Are you anxious? Are you hopeful? Are you confident? Do you like the way you feel? And if not, let's see how we can change that. So we're going to answer 4 questions. Where are we now? Where are the governance gaps and risks? What does future readiness require? What leadership capabilities? How do we make the shift from being compliance focused to being capability driven? And where do we go from here? Where I'll share some actionable steps that you can start taking right now. There we go. So if we look at governance today, the frameworks that you see here, King 4, ISO 37000, Institute of Directors with the UK, NACD or Private Directors Association in the US, the SEC, fiduciary laws in your geographic area. Frameworks like these provide information, knowledge. They define roles and structures for your board, maybe even some key processes. But what they do not do is build capabilities, behavior, the mindset you should have. Many of these frameworks were developed in a different time, a more stable time. Now you might be feeling that this really isn't sufficient given the challenges, the turbulence, the uncertainty we're facing today. You might be feeling that as an individual, or maybe you feel you're okay, but the board or leadership team you're on isn't. So let's dive in a little bit more. We need to ask ourselves what's missing. But I think first it's important to recognize what's there. So if we think about King 4, we think about IOD, OECD, we're covering ethical leadership. We talked about board structure, what committees and roles need to be filled. We know there's a lot about compliance and disclosure. Now, particularly outside of the US, although it's starting to happen in the US, is this idea of stakeholder inclusivity. It's not just about shareholders, it's about all stakeholders. And it's about addressing reporting and oversight. But what these models don't address is how do you govern in turbulent times like this? How do you look at boardroom dynamics and culture to make sure the right discussions are taking place? Are boards and leadership teams developing the capabilities they need? And is there a mechanism, a process, a system to ensure sustainable value, value creation, and not just focusing on compliance and fiduciary oversight? It's not fit for purpose. And there's a growing gap. We want to be fit for the future. Now, the thing is, if we don't address this gap, we need to understand what is the risk of maintaining the status quo. Now, this might be a little shocking, but is there a time bomb in your boardroom? And are you aware of it? And if you're not aware of it, how are you ever going to disarm it? You don't have much time left because competition, the pace of turbulence, ensures that this is the case. Now, when you think about maintaining the status quo, of course it is a choice, but legacy thinking is comfortable, but it can be very costly. Companies get caught off guard. They're forced to be reactive. They're constantly firefighting. That increases your risk, that increases your costs, and it can make a bad situation worse. On the other hand, just notice this is, here we go. On the other hand, because you're behind, because you're struggling to recover, you're missing opportunities. You're not investing in innovation, and you might be losing talent. This is critical to address. Now, you might be feeling this already. You might even be destroying or diminishing the value of your organization. You might not intend it, but it's happening. Now, the antidote to this is to become future ready. But what does future readiness mean? So the best definition that I've come up with is that future readiness is the capacity of a leader, leadership team, and board in their organization to consistently anticipate, adapt, and act effectively amid uncertainty, disruption, and rapid change before you're forced to do so. So again, anticipate, adapt, and act. Now take a moment and just reflect. Where is your weakest link? Is it in anticipating, adapting, or acting? Now make a note of this because we're going to talk about all three. Now, you don't need to know the future to become future ready, but you need to be ready for it. And future readiness is not something you do once. Future readiness is not a destination. It's a discipline that you must continually practice. So how do we move from disruption to value creation? That's where new capabilities are needed that need to be developed. Now, it's been increasingly clear over the last several years that what got us here will not get us to where we're going. And for that matter, it's irresponsible and dangerous to think what we learned in the past is sufficient. Now, with over 30 years of working with senior leadership teams, interviewing business leaders, board members, I've identified 5 key tensions that leaders need to navigate in times like these. And it's not enough to choose one side or the other. We need both and thinking. Now, I call this capability model the 5 leadership superpowers because each superpower addresses one of those 5 tensions. Now, if we look at the 5 superpowers, starting at the top, we have present futurist. It's about balancing and integrating the present and the future. It's about understanding our context today while at the same time having foresight into the future, monitoring trends, and integrating that to inform decisions. The second tension is between experience and learning. You need to do both. Experience can be leveraged, but it's not always relevant. So we have to learn, hence experienced learner. Third is being a prepared risk taker. Now, some of you may shudder when you say, I'm supposed to be a risk taker, but risk taking is a part of business. Whether we do something or don't do something, there's risk. It's about making smart bets. It's about being more risk intelligent. And it's about having a posture of preparedness. So it's that integration that makes the difference. Fourth is being a strategic executor. It's balancing strategy and operations. It's recognizing that you need both to create value. And fifth is about being an accountable collaborator. Today's complex challenges are not things we can solve alone. We need to work with our teams. We need to work as a board. We need to work as a leadership team. We need to work across organizational boundaries and even with our ecosystem partners. And at the same time, these teams can be collectively accountable for delivering outcomes. So those are the 5: present futurist, experienced learner, prepared risk taker, strategic executor, and accountable collaborator. Now, it's not enough just to have these capabilities. It's about applying them. It's about the behaviors behind them and the mindset. Now, some of you might be wondering, why am I calling these superpowers? Well, they're superpowers because the majority, I say the majority, a large segment of leadership, of boards, do not have these. So when you have the superpowers, it actually is a superpower. It gives you an advantage. Now, the thing is, each of these, as we go through describing them, is, excuse me, these are proven capabilities. I will share with you cases of where high performing leaders and organizations exhibit these superpowers to get superior results. So let's have our first poll now, because what I'd like you to do is, with the exception of present futurists, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but with the poll, I want you to look at the other superpowers: experienced learner, prepared risk taker, strategic executor, and accountable collaborator, and tell me which one is the most important one for you to improve. So as we're waiting for the poll results, I'm going to jump to present futurist and tell you a little bit about this one. And I'm going to do it through telling a story about the Mayo Clinic. Now, the Mayo Clinic is a famous global healthcare organization originally based in the US. Now, when the clinic launched its bold forward strategy in 2019, its board wasn't reacting to disruption, it was anticipating it. They backed major investments in digital platforms, AI, and remote care, including the Mayo Clinic platform, years before these became industry norms. The board actively engaged in scenario planning and ensured their innovations stayed rooted in Mayo's mission of patient care. By integrating that foresight with an understanding of today's environment, the board helped transform Mayo from a place you go to a system that comes to you without compromising its values. And you can see here, what are some of the characteristics of a present futurist? It's about robustly understanding the present, anticipating the future, and integrating insights from both to inform decisions. So let me pause there. Carolyn, can you tell me what the order was of the remaining superpowers?
Hi, Jay. We've got the results on the screen now. I don't know if you can see them.
I cannot at this moment.
Okay. So we've got 24% for the present futurist.
Yep.
12% experienced learner.
Yep.
23%, so almost the same, for a prepared risk taker. We've got the most at strategic executor at 29%. And accountable collaborator at 12%, same as experienced learner.
All right, so the two top ones were present futurist, strategic executor, and then prepared risk taker.
That's right.
Okay, so let's jump to prepared risk taker first. So with prepared risk taker, let's look at Samsung. So in the early 2010s, Samsung's board backed a bold strategic pivot. They started investing billions of dollars into semiconductors and OLED displays, really high resolution displays. Now, if you remember in the early teens, we were in a recession. So global demand was uncertain, but they were under intense global competition and economic pressure, and they had to make these decisions. They were risky, but calculated. And the board, in making these decisions, supported long term capital outlays to invest in these technologies. They prioritized how they worked with supply chains to make sure they were getting what they needed. And they reinforced R&D even during downturns. So they were taking a smart, calculated risk. And the payoff for taking that risk, Samsung became the global leader in memory chips and advanced displays. They took what was a high stakes bet into a dominant market position. So when we think about being a prepared risk taker, it's about navigating risk strategically. It's about balancing boldness with pragmatism. It's about improving risk intelligence. So we're not looking at risks in isolation, but what we're doing is look at that system of risks. And I talked about interconnected earlier. If you think about the issues around tariffs, global conflicts, supply chain issues, all of these things are interconnected. You can't just look at one in isolation. And it's about developing organizational preparedness, whether it was with Samsung looking at supply chain control, or us as individuals, we are prepared in our own homes, whether it be for a storm, a power outage, an illness. We have supplies. We talk to our families about what do we do in an emergency. We have duct tape. We have extra water. What is it that companies do to ensure they're prepared for what's next? And two questions that you should be asking your board. How does your board balance bold, smart moves with real preparedness? Think about what your board and leadership teams are doing in this regard. And if they're not, what should they be doing? And think about what your board has done to improve its holistic risk intelligence. Historically, companies looked at discrete risks, a cyber breach, a tariff, a conflict, a strike. But we can't look at those things alone because they're all connected. They're affecting different things. I go back to the time during COVID when the barge got stuck in the Suez Canal. Here in Atlanta, I said, oh, that doesn't affect me. But all of a sudden, one venue, the Suez Canal being blocked, reverberated around the world. So this one, it's notable that this was one of the top ones because when I do surveys, this is the one that most challenges people. And the reason why is for us, if there's disruption and uncertainty, the first thing we do, and this goes back to our survival response, is we say, we're going to play not to lose. We want to be defensive. We want to protect ourselves. But playing not to lose is not how you win. You have to play to win and do that smartly. So the next one I want to talk about is strategic executor. I think that was number one. And I want to talk about Discovery Limited, which is a South African founded financial services organization. They operate in healthcare, life insurance, long-term savings, banking, and wellness. Now, Discovery set out to become a global leader in behavior-based insurance. You're wondering, what is behavior-based insurance? Well, it looks at your individual behaviors to influence dynamically in real time premiums and rewards. So through its research, it's identified certain behaviors that increase risk. So if you're thinking life insurance, for example, if someone's overweight, they're smoking, they're drinking a lot, their premiums should be higher because they're higher risk. Same thing if you're looking at driving insurance. If somebody's getting tickets, if someone's driving fast, that influences premiums. So it's that level that they can personalize their rates more. Now, the board didn't just approve the strategy. They embedded execution discipline into every step. So what does that mean? They launched Vitality, and Vitality shared value insurance. And when they did that, there was tight alignment across the organization. There was alignment around the innovations to support that strategy. Their actuarial modeling supported that strategy, the partnerships they had, and their expansion plans. So it wasn't just coming up with a strategy, but it was having a disciplined execution plan to bring it to reality. And beyond that, the board monitored specific metrics to make sure they had empowered agile teams and ensure that capital was allocated to match long-term priorities. Now, this disciplined execution turned what was a bold concept and is still new to many areas into a scalable model. And they now do this in over 30 countries. So when you think about strategic executor, it's about integrating strategy and execution. You can't have one without the other. And it's about balancing the short-term operations execution with strategy. If you're weighted too heavy on strategy and you're not executing, it's a hallucination or a dream. And if all you're doing is focusing on execution, but you're not considering strategy, you're very busy, but where are you going? So it's both of those together. And in times of turbulence, like what we're in now, you can't just lock in the strategy and say, okay, we'll look at this in a few years and lock in an execution plan. You have to adaptively manage strategy execution. Strategy may very well stay the same, but how you execute under certain conditions may change. And in some cases, you might even need to adapt your strategy because maybe it's no longer relevant given changes in the market. So questions that the board should be asking itself, that you should be asking yourself as a director, is how well does the board connect strategic vision and intent with operational reality? Do they do like Discovery did in tightly linking these? And does your board encourage and foster adaptive strategy management? Or is it locked in? Now, in the past, the board would have an offsite. They'd have a strategy development, strategic planning session. And they would say, that's our plan for the next 3 years. Well, we can't do that in an environment that's constantly changing, where there's turbulence, where there's rapid technology advancements. So we need to be more flexible. Let's try and hit, so we did present, futurist, prepared risk taker. Let's hit the other two very quickly. So with experienced learner, remember I talked about experience isn't enough. You have to be open to learning. And Unilever is a perfect example of this. Now, in 2017, Kraft Heinz tried to take over Unilever, but Unilever's board just didn't defend itself against the takeover. They took the time to reflect on why this was happening. They conducted a deep review of what made the company vulnerable, and they learned the importance of purpose, agility, and stakeholder trust had become, and they need to turn that into strategic assets, not just words. Now, guided by those insights, the board doubled down on sustainable brands. They streamlined the portfolio and they strengthened shareholder engagement. Now, what they did was they turned a threat into a learning moment. The board members emerged more resilient, more focused, and able to govern with sharper insight. So it's about leveraging but challenging experience. It's about being curious, about encouraging debate in a safe environment. And some questions. Is your board learning or just listening? Does it enable and encourage inclusive dialogue and debate? And with accountable collaborator, I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, it's about collaborating across boundaries, not just functions, but also, ecosystem partners. It's about having the right people on a team and holding the team accountable for shared outcomes. And asking yourself these questions: does the board ensure collaboration and accountability across committees and even in the board? And how is the board being accountable collaborators with their stakeholders? Okay, so when you look at the superpowers individually, they can be very impactful, but they're most impactful when they're working as a system, because each superpower supports and informs the other. So when they're working as a system, it's not additive. The impact is exponential. Now, I would say individuals should strive to be proficient in 1 to 3, and they should appreciate the rest. But when we're talking about a board or a leadership team, they should have all 5 around the table. So that eliminates blind spots. And when you do that, there are amazing benefits. They better understand the present and foresee the future. They know what capabilities they need to build. They improve their preparedness and organizational resilience. And when they do that, they're dampening their downside risk. And because they recover faster, they can pounce on opportunities, amplifying those returns. And they're increasing value for all stakeholders. And that gives them a competitive advantage over their peers. So who wins in that case? So who wins when you become future ready? First of all, customers win. They're better taken care of. Their needs are anticipated and met. They want to do business with you. Next, Your employees win because they're more engaged, they're valued, their opinions are respected, they're included, resulting in greater productivity and pride and ownership in their company. Partners win because your relationship with them is about collaborating. It's not, can I squeeze that other party for something more? It's about having that alignment around the outcomes you're trying to deliver and having a win-win type of relationship. And your partners could be government or regulatory bodies. How do you work with them versus against them? It's also about society. Are we having ethical practices that lead to sustainable returns? And if we're practicing these things, we're adding value to society and the communities around us. Now, when all these four are in place, shareholders win and sustainable value is created. If any one of these is missing, the results are not sustainable and shareholder returns don't last. So the question is, as we enter this third part in question 3, how do we move from principles to practice? Now, principles set a destination, but principles without capability is very hollow. And it's the superpowers that help you get there. Now, there's a phrase you often hear in board governance: noses in, fingers out. Well, just sniffing around is not enough for boards. They need to put their heads in. They need to use their brains. And that's where judgment, foresight, continuous learning, more effective decision making, and that collaboration and trust helps to make that board future ready. Compliance is the floor, it's not the ceiling. And how you go up is through that capability development. How do you operationalize future ready governance? Where do the superpowers apply to your board processes? Well, first, if we look at, strategy oversight, being a present futurist, understanding the environment you're in is the context that you build your strategy and execute it in. So that those two superpowers become very relevant. Not that the others aren't, but those two especially. If we think about risk governance, being a present futurist helps us inform what are the risks we might be facing, how do they interact, and tell us what we need to prepare for. If we think about CEO oversight and succession, being a strategic executor is essential, but you also want to hire leaders who are capable of learning, who are curious, who ask questions, who engage people. And when it comes to good group dynamics in decision making, that being an accountable collaborator, knowing you need to work together, you need to respect each other's opinions, you need to learn, that combination of learning and collaboration with accountability becomes incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, when you do this, let's look at how the board and leadership gains. So first of all, there's greater clarity and consistency of that strategic message. The organization knows what it needs to do. The board and the executive team are aligned. There are fewer misunderstandings. That removes barriers. Same thing between the leadership team and the rest of the organization. Alignment removes friction. It's also about being contextually and risk aware. So if you have that foresight, if you're looking for signals, you're less apt to be surprised. You're going to see things coming. And you're going to better understand your environment. And the next way you win is by that agility and adaptability. You see things faster. You're able to respond in a more timely manner. You're able to pivot and you're able to adapt. And look, as you look at these are very, very powerful drivers of results. Now, the question is, how quickly do you want to get these results? Now, let's take a moment to reflect and have the next poll up. So, where is your board on the spectrum? Is it compliance based, principle based, based, or is it value creating? So let's run that poll now. And as we're doing that,
poll's up, Jay.
Yes.
Yep. So if everyone can answer the poll, we've got to leave it up for a minute. We've 30 seconds down already. So if people can answer, thanks, Jay. And then do you want me to show it straight away?
Yeah. I mean, if you could show it, so have them answer it. I'll keep on going.
Sure.
So the question is, it's not, well, actually two questions. Are you moving? And are you moving in the right direction from compliance-based to value creating? And are you moving quickly enough? Or do you need to accelerate? Because becoming and staying future ready, again, is a journey and a discipline. So how are we doing on the poll?
We are all done. I'm sharing it now. So our highest is the compliance-based or reactive compliance, and that's 37%. Next up is value creating, which is a good answer, 30%. Then we have principle-based, 23%, and capability-based, 10%.
Right. So the value creating at 30 is actually good, for an audience. That's one of the highest I've seen. But that still means 70% have a way to move. Now, becoming and staying future ready is something you as a board, as a leadership team, need to own. You can't outsource it, but you don't have to do it alone. Having an experienced guide who can address those challenges holistically with a framework that's pragmatic and actionable can help you build that internal capacity and capability. So what are some steps you can take today? First of all, assess yourself individually, assess your board and leadership team. I offer a free Are You a Future Ready Leader assessment. If you scan the QR code, you'll have access to the survey if you haven't taken it already. And I know this will be provided to everyone afterwards in a follow-up message. The next thing you can do is learn. So learning, you can enroll in a self-paced online course that I developed about becoming a future-ready leader with the 5 Leadership Superpowers. You can schedule an executive briefing for your leadership team or a master class and have a customized program that fits your organization, the conditions it's facing. So it's not just, plain vanilla training, it's training that's relevant and actionable for your organization. And the third way is to schedule a free 30-minute future readiness consult. So in that free discussion, I'll listen to understand your situation. We'll talk about what the future looks like. And we Together we'll co-create a pragmatic and actionable plan. Now you can start with any one of these or all three. I think starting with our assessment or a discussion can be most impactful. Now you have my contact information. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's do a quick recap. What did we learn today? First of all, disruption and uncertainty are normal. They're not bugs. This is the way it is. Future readiness is an imperative. And we talked about why. What's the risk and cost of not being future ready? You don't want that bomb to go off in your boardroom. We talked about how the 5 leadership superpowers bridge that capability gap and the value they provide. And we talked about where do you apply those superpowers in board governance. It's also, you can use the superpowers as a screen when you're thinking about CEO succession, as you're thinking about who should be on your board. And we talked about actionable steps you can take to become future ready. Now, it's up to you. You can act today or be behind tomorrow. Let's build the future of governance together and reimagine what that future can look like. So let me stop sharing my screen now. Let's see.
Thank you so much, Jay. We've got so many questions for you on all sorts of different things. I didn't want to interrupt your flow. It was really very insightful. People are really appreciative. We will be sharing the slides onto the event page after the event. And then the QR codes will be available. We'll be sending out an email to you so that you can access all of this information. Great. Thanks, Jay. So I'm going to start. For those of you, we've got 10 questions in the Q&A. If you can help us, please, by up arrowing or thumbs up those questions that you are most wanting to be asked. We've got about 10, 13 minutes left, so we can't ask all of them and get decent answers from Jay. So if you just thumbs up the Q&A, the ones with the most thumbs will come up to the top so we can ask those first. This is one that was right in the beginning of your presentation. It's from Bill Nelson. How frequently do you find boards where there is no common concept of what the organization is for, the purpose of the organization? How often do you find that?
I would say it's infrequent, but it's not uncommon. Because a lot of times, you think about companies we're in, they have the shiny object syndrome, and they're chasing after things. They're not playing the long game. They're not thinking about who do we want to be. And that's a critical question that I ask my clients when I talk with them. And the question is, if look out 5 years, forget about today. 5 years out, you're a wildly successful company. I'm a reporter for the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal. I'm writing an article about your company and what it has achieved. Describe the company to me. So you visually illustrate what that company looks like, what it stands for, who its customers are, what it delivers. And getting alignment on that destination brings that board or that leadership team together because they have to work through those issues. If they don't, they're going to be scattered and ineffective.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, so it's critical, and you don't often come across it, but sometimes there are organizations that don't understand it. Thanks. Here's one from Andile. How can we define leadership competencies for future-ready governance when many board appointees are politically exposed individuals? So this is in government kind of scenarios with inherent conflicts of interest. Given the risks of prioritizing political loyalty over public good, should governance models adopt alternative appointment mechanisms such as independent panels, merit-based criteria, or stakeholder oversight to mitigate these conflicts? What do you think, Jay?
First of all, I think we need to be careful about who we put on our boards. And, obviously, we have a duty of loyalty to put the company and its stakeholders first. Very often easier said than done. But if we start to think about the leaders that we put on our boards, on our leadership teams, and use the superpowers as a screen. So it's not just, do they have X number of years of experience? Do they know the industry? Maybe they were CFO. That's not enough. They need to have these future ready capabilities. You want people who can think critically, who can look at things from a systemic perspective. Now, that doesn't mean politics is going to be completely out. That's part of the environment. But prioritizing that, and when you think about board evaluations, it's not just a tick the box exercise. You have to look at, do they have these capabilities? Are they addressing these issues proactively? Is the board actively engaged, having those debates? Or is it kind of sitting back and more passive and letting the CEO and the chair run everything without discussion or debate?
Yeah, very important. We've got another significantly apt question from Claire. Claire says, given that the chair has the deciding vote, and sometimes the chair does, and sometimes it's consensus built, but given a chair has a deciding vote, is there a preference for a dominant leadership superpower for them to have or to be more autocratic?
So I think, if you're thinking about the chair, or you're thinking about a CEO, I think two of the most important superpowers are being an experienced learner and an accountable collaborator, because you're going to get the best results, the best decisions, the best insights if you're paying attention to your team. And if they're being stifled, if they're not being listened to, that can be a blind spot. So I talk about some other paradoxes, some characteristics that are important. I think it's important to be confident and humble at the same time. Confident, we as a team can do this, but humble enough to ask for help. Knowledgeable curiosity. You might think you know it all, but you really don't. Be curious, ask questions. Get diverse opinions, talk to your stakeholders are all very important criteria, because if an executive, a CEO, a board chair, if they're not open to learning, if they're not open to collaboration, it's going to be monolithic. And when it's monolithic, you have blinders on and you don't see what's going on around you.
Very, very important, just to keep questioning and those Socratic questioning to gain perspective, to gain insight, as opposed to feeling like you're on a board and you should know everything, so there's nothing to ask. Really important points. There's another one from Bill here. How often do boards fail to identify stakeholders who may be below the radar and beyond the collaboration scan?
So I think part of that discussion actually comes from talking to stakeholders. That, if you're talking to, different associations, different governing bodies, your customers, you find out who their stakeholders are. They might not be on your radar screen, but if you're helping your customer be successful, are they Are you helping them be successful for their customers? So I think it's just asking those questions. Who else is affected? Whose input do I need? Just as you look at risks holistically, think about the impact your company has holistically. Who might it not be listening to that it should?
Again, being an open to learning, to understanding, and to engaging. Thank you. This question here from Jeetan is around, Jeetan, I hope I got your name right, and Chandu's also commented on it. It's around the strategy execution. So you mentioned about the board role in strategy and direction setting, and we know that the corporate governance codes talk about co-creating strategy between the board and the executive. Can you provide us with a little bit more insight around the board's role in strategy?
So the board comes from a variety of different perspectives. I think the board can help bring the outside in. They have a more global perspective. They come from, ideally a variety of backgrounds. So they can bring that insight in where, say, a leadership team might be more focused internally. And they bring that perspective, so that opens things up. Conversely, the leadership team makes the board more aware of what are the execution capabilities? Where might investment be needed for development? And I think it's that dialogue between the two. It becomes very hard if they're done separately. The board sets the strategy, the company executes. You lose some of that ownership that you get from co-creating. So I think that's really important, linking the strategy and execution. And that way, the board and the leadership team are collaborating. They're next to each other versus across the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear about the insights model around the board is really the foresight and the oversight, and then management really brings that deep insight that the board couldn't possibly have, in that insight and hindsight, that experience from being on the ground, as you say. So I quite like that model. We've got one here, and I know we're running out of time, everyone, so thank you so much. From Christian, it goes back to your Samsung example. So if you can cast your mind back there, I know you've covered a lot here. Using the Samsung example, is it a fact that the board of directors took the decision to invest in semiconductors and OLED, or was it from an executive team and the board of directors just supported it? So who was really driving that decision? If it was the board, if it was a board initiative, can you give us a glimpse into the board members, their age and experience, and basically how they leverage those superpowers? And then the question is, were most of them also executive? So actually the board members, how strategic were they? How forward-thinking were they?
So let me answer that, not just for Samsung, but more generically. And I think the thing here, again, whether it was an idea that came from a board member or somebody on the executive team, to make those decisions, they had to have those rigorous discussions and debates. It's, they needed people who had that engineering background, who could understand the technology and how it would give Samsung an advantage. But also on the consumer side, why would customers want this? How would this differentiate from other companies? I think it's having that mix of backgrounds. If you have a board and all they think is technical, then they're not thinking about the other issues. And I think the board, yes, they need to have expertise they bring to the table. But remember, the board is collectively responsible. So they have to work together, and those softer but vital skills are so important because they all have to understand, they all have to buy in. And it's the same thing with the leadership team. It's about breaking down those silos. So, getting into specifics that, that doesn't apply to your company, which is why I want to talk more broadly about where these ideas come in. And it shouldn't be, oh, that wasn't invented here. That was this versus that. It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you creating value for stakeholders? Is it sustainable? Is it something you can execute?
Jay,
And
it's been fantastic. I know that we are out of time. We could spend another hour. Everybody is very, very complimentary. I will send you the chat. So thank you so much, everybody, for giving your compliments to Jay on the chat. I will send them through to chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Jay, thank you for making the time. We have met a couple of times to get this on the go. So we really are very grateful here at the Good Governance Academy. Thank you, Jay, for spending time with us.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
This is why you need to join the Good Governance Academy today. Unlock a community that's transforming governance on a global scale. The Good Governance Academy is a non-profit global organization dedicated to promoting good governance and collaboration. We align with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on conscious corporate leadership and sustainable value creation. By joining our community, you'll gain access to exclusive events like webinars, workshops, and roundtables featuring global thought leaders. Get personalized event invitations, stay updated with community news, and explore our extensive video library. Plus, collaborate on our ESG exchange to create sustainability reporting playbooks. And the best part, it's all free, so don't wait. Join the Good Governance Academy community today and take your governance game to the next level. Visit goodgovernance.academy. Together, let's create a better world through good governance.